Hello, dear friends. My name is Vasyl Pekhno. I'm a Ukrainian journalist, and I invite all of you to watch this latest update on Ukrainian battle map situation as of August the 23rd. Please like this video, watch it till the end, subscribe to this YouTube channel, and leave your comments just below the video. So I think it's time to sum up this week, which we've been through already. So let's start today's overview. So it's worth stating, probably the most important starting point, the defense forces are currently working very successfully on several sections of the front. In some areas, the Russians are retreating, and it is precisely about these counter-offensive actions of ours and the retreats of the Russians that I will begin the review, starting with the Novopavlivka direction. Because yesterday I already reported that in the area of Novopavlivka, right here, the settlement of Tolstoy was liberated by the Ukrainian Armed Forces. And this was done by units of the main intelligence directorate, SHUR. Now it is reported that Zeleny High, north of Tolstoy, has also been cleared by our Marines. In particular, the 1st Battalion of the 37th Marine Brigade reported the liberation of this settlement, unfurling a flag there to demonstrate their control. Yes, it can be said that the Russians also often engage in flag planting, taking photos and filming videos with flags, but that is not the case here, not in this story, because it is highly likely, and it very much appears that it strongly seems that the defense forces have now intensified tactical counteroffensive actions in the Novopavlivka direction. And literally in the last few days, we've heard about the liberation of two villages, Tolstoy and Zeleny High, which is precisely evidence of such actions. Taking part in this very operation earlier were also fighters from the main intelligence directorate, who were likewise involved in the liberation of Tolstoy. The GUR unit Bratstvo, a special detachment, well, more precisely, the Bratstvo detachment as part of the Timur special unit, successfully coordinated this operation in the preparatory actions in Zeleny High, together with fighters from the Russian Volunteer Corps, RDK, first stopping the enemy's advance and then enabling further work, including by the Marines from the 37th Marine Brigade. Here we can see exactly how the GUR operatives worked in this direction in advance, and in that same Zeleny High, they captured Russian servicemen who got lost there and surrendered. Well, as we can see, they're coming out in groups. There were several of them at once. So overall, we're seeing a positive trend in what's happening now on one of these Donetsk sections of the front, which until recently was extremely critical. It really seemed like everything was going to go badly there. Now, in some places, the situation, I don't want to raise expectations too much, but I want to say that it has started to show positive momentum. Positive momentum is a very cautious term, but that's exactly what we're seeing here in the Novopavlivka direction. Moreover, soldiers from the 67th Mechanized Brigade are also operating here, and they have demonstrated strikes against enemy forces that reach quite deep into this area. Here are some clips from the friendly Telegram community, Okohora. Oh, sorry, we'll get to Okohora in a moment. This one is from Infactom. This is Infactom showing that, as you can see, it's actually closer to Zirka, where Russian forces are being attacked in this direction by the soldiers of the 67th Mechanized Brigade. Let's go back to this map. Here's the star right here. So what's the point here? What's the logic behind this? There is an assumption that right now there is an attempt to push the Russians back to the line of the Mokryali River, which flows right here in order to try to establish the front line along it. To push the Russians all the way here, up to Yalta and Zaporizhzhia. That's what we're actually, well, again, this is just an assumption. We'll see whether it materializes into some concrete not just theoretical conclusions, but direct actions, or if something will crystallize. This is what we're currently observing in the Novopavlivka direction. Very, very cautious actions. One really needs to be very cautious with such judgments, because even in the Pokrovsk direction, or rather the Dobropillia direction further north, where we already had expectations, where the BBC had already published various materials saying that the enemy was almost on the verge of a major encirclement in Donbas. In reality, you shouldn't think that way, because it's highly likely that the enemy managed to avoid significant trouble here in the Dobropillia direction. For example, Kostiantin Mashovets, an analyst from the Information Resistance Group, reports that at the beginning of this incursion, at the start of their advance in the Nikonorivka area, this village of Nikonorivka, where our forces actually cut off the penetration of this Russian salient. The Russians brought in reinforcements. And if it had really been cut off, the logistics would have been completely severed. And then we could truly talk about an encirclement. But right into this area, the enemy brought in an additional brigade, the 1st Separate Motorized Rifle Brigade, which I believe is part of the 51st Combined Arms Army operating here. And now, in fact, the Russians are trying to expand their influence in the direction of Nikanorovka towards Shakhov. In this way, in general, Mashovets reports that the enemy has already reached the western outskirts of Shakhove. That is, Shakhov is this settlement on the left flank of our defense in relation to this salient. Accordingly, it's also not worth making overly triumphant reports, because even if Kucherev Yar here to the north hasn't been cleared yet, and it's difficult and premature to say that the situation has been completely fully stabilized. So let's not get ahead of ourselves, because that creates negative trends in the information space later on. Let's keep it normal, calm, restrained, and factual. At Novopavlivka, we are now seeing our troops advance, and we acknowledge that. We won't be rushing too far ahead anywhere. We won't be making any far-reaching predictions about the Zaporizhzhia direction, because right now there aren't any significant movements either in Orikhiv or in Huliaipol. The most intense area of combat remains this region, the westernmost one, Plavny Kamyanske, from where the enemy, as I mentioned yesterday, is trying to move towards Stepnohirsk across the fields, just as they have done before. But especially in Plavny, this is how the Russians are trying to break through to Stepnohirsk toward the settlement of Primorske. The geography of this settlement is quite interesting. I'll show you what it looks like now. Here is Primorske, you see, with this little tail, and right now the Russians are trying to reach it through Plavny to get to Primorske so they can move further towards Stepnohirsk. The thing is, right at this southern point of Primorske, there are very densely populated houses and dachas, and if the enemy gets there, they have a chance to gain a foothold. This, in fact, explains why the Russians are now trying to advance along the former shoreline of the Dnipro River or the Kakovka Reservoir. Now, they are even using the territory that used to be the riverbed itself, utilizing it to advance further. Stepnohirsk is actually of significant importance to the enemy. Once again, I want to highlight this importance from the enemy's perspective. Why might they be advancing towards it, and why do they aim to do so? Because the area around Stepnohirsk and its elevations allowed them to reach the southern outskirts of the city of Zaporizhzhia from a distance of about 20 to 25 kilometers, and to terrorize our million-strong city with FPV drones. This is the kind of terrorist objective the enemy has. There is also another logistical objective here, which in particular analysts from Deep State have previously discussed in their battle map updates regarding the shelling of our logistical supply routes, especially those running from Zaporizhzhia to Orikhiv. And here, for example, in the area of Komishuvaka as well, if the enemy advances to Stepnohirsk, they could fire on our logistics routes should they have further intentions or a desire to engage more seriously on the Zaporizhzhia front. Where else, in fact, is he carrying out terrorism, trying to use such tactics against Zaporizhzhia in terms of shelling the city? Yes, that's about Kherson. Yesterday, once again, but it's not just yesterday. This is basically a constant reality for Kherson, but I'll just show this video. Another airstrike, but so far, friends, there are no signs that there was any activity on the ground. There isn't any. There is no assault on Kherson, no attempts to cross the Dnipro, because such attempts would be suicidal. The Russians understand this, and it's nothing more than information warfare. At most, they can carry out so-called offensive operations in quotation marks. But the bombings themselves are nothing more than terror against the local population there. And what terror really means was felt most acutely by Vovchansk. Yesterday, a video from the day before yesterday surfaced from Vovchansk, dated August 21st, 2025, which once again shows just an insane, I don't even know what words to use to describe, the wild scene of what the city of Vovchansk in northern Kharkiv region looks like. There is nothing left intact there after the so-called Russian liberators. They have turned everything completely into ruins.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
This is how they want to wipe from the earth virtually everything that is alive, everything that was built. This video is from the pilots of the Artillery Reconnaissance Battery ARIs of the 57th Motorized Infantry Brigade, which has been holding the defense here for over a year now in these destroyed, bombed out, completely and utterly annihilated ruins. By the way, it seems that somewhere in there flashed by the Vovchansk aggregate plant over which there were once extremely fierce battles. Well, since we're already up here in the north, let me remind you, friends, where Vovchansk is. Here it is. Here's Vovchansk. So since we're here in the north, I suggest we talk about the territory in the Bolota area, because right now there are clearly very destructive processes happening there. I'll just mention another Telegram channel now, which I'll refer to, Okohora. These destructive processes consist of, as you can see now on the map, the well-known cases of strikes on various Russian infrastructure objects that have occurred literally just in the past month, which isn't even over yet. There's still a week left in August, and the Russians have already received more than 27 probably recorded strikes. These include oil depots, oil refineries, one airfield, and railway infrastructure. At least 7 stations in the Rostov and Volgograd regions, as well as in Voronezh, were hit. One air defense facility in Yeysk, 11 enterprises connected to the military-industrial complex, one of which was attacked twice this month. Well, that's very close to record numbers for the defense forces. No matter what anyone says, people can talk a billion times about these. They can stick needles into that voodoo doll of the Ukrainian president and say that he promised 3,000 missiles, 30,000 long-range drones. But in reality, strikes are happening. In reality, truly strikes are happening. In reality, we are causing serious nightmares for Russian frontline and deep rear territories. And these drones and these missiles are obviously reaching their targets. So we have another topic about missiles. This is the Flamingo missile. Yesterday, a video appeared from the publication Politico. They, citing the manufacturer of the Flamingo missiles, Firepoint, actually show and talk once again about this technology. The thing is, personally, I don't quite understand why there's so much attention. Although I was also glad when I saw this technological marvel. A missile with a range of 3,000 kilometers and a warhead weight of 1,150 kilograms. By the way, I'll pause here because this is no longer the Flamingo, this is the FP1, a drone called FP1, which, by the way, from the same manufacturer, Firepoint, is now flying very actively and effectively over the territory of the Russian Federation. You'll see in a moment which targets it has struck, including its contribution to those recent attacks on Russian oil refineries and other facilities. But in any case, let's take a look. But coming back to the Flamingo, I just want to say that, I don't quite understand why it's getting so much attention. Everything is being shown. Everything is on display. There's just so much of it. I would like, if you look at it in the context of course, informational pressure on the state so that it wakes up and finally starts buying these missiles in larger quantities, then yes, that makes sense. And it turns out that the manufacturer is taking on all these security risks. But, it's a shame that we have to appeal in this way. These are drones. FP1 is another product from the company Firepoint. It is now actively used to strike Russian oil refineries and other targets. Here we can see this video montage of attacks by FP1. This is another well-known drone. It seems to have a range of 1,500 kilometers, which is half that of the FP5, that is the Flamingo missile, and it delivers strikes like these on the targets we later see on the map. In short, excellent work for August, but to be fair, it should be noted that our enemy is not just sitting idly by either. They also have certain technological innovations, with which I will conclude today's review. The soldiers of the 118th Mechanized Brigade spotted this kind of Orlan in the sky. The Orlan is a Russian reconnaissance drone, and it's one of the most widely used in Russia. And now, in fact, the Orlan has become a carrier for FPV drones. You can see under the wings on the pylons, 2 FPV quadcopter-type drones are highlighted with arrows. The point is that, this is a normal development, clearly a technological step forward. These are so-called mother drones, where one main drone carries regular FPV drones over a longer distance. And then when these FPV drones detach from the main drone, whether it's a reconnaissance drone or some other type, the main drone serves as an airborne relay antenna for them. In this way, FPV drones as strike weapons can fly very long distances. In fact, the Russians are now using the same method, launching smaller strike drones with the help of a mother drone. It's not that this is some kind of innovation or that they haven't used it before. It's just that for the first time, or maybe for the first time in the public domain, it became known that FPV drones are being carried by Orlans. We have this as well. We've actually had these mother drones for a very long time, about 2 years, if not more probably. They're used by the same Wild Hornets. This is a well-known Ukrainian drone manufacturer. They're produced by the same Magyar. Back in his previous days when he was the commander of the Magyar's Birds unit, he talked about such devices. And it's not just these units I've mentioned and the manufacturers who are involved in this. Mother drones are a common practice, but now the Russians are using them this way too. So we need to talk about this openly as well, that the enemy is keeping pace with us technologically. That's how things are, friends. Thank you for your attention. Take care, all the best, and see you next time.